Thanks, Brian. For the past 20 years, Meredith Perkins has dedicated her career to promoting healthy urban forestry management, connecting people to trees in ways that transform both lives and landscapes. She has previously served as in the public sector as the Urban and Community Forestry Coordinator for Utah's Division of Forestry, and in the private sector as a principal consultant for Davey Resource Group Incorporated. Meredith has the technical skills to assess tree risk, develop urban forestry plans, and even offer expert witness testimony. But her favorite thing is sharing the amazing power of trees with others. In her current role as Executive Director of Forest ReLeaf of Missouri, Meredith advocates for tree planting and forest conservation across the urban, rural, and wild landscapes. Meredith has a degree in forestry from the University of Missouri-Columbia and is an ISA certified arborist and an adjunct instructor at Merrimack Community College. Please welcome Meredith McAvoy Perkins.
Thanks so much, Bob. It's wonderful to be here. I'm delighted to share in your morning rituals and excited to talk about this particular topic. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll get started. All right. So just a couple of disclaimers. First of all, I could look at this scene all day. This is Shawn Nature Reserve, as Rachel so aptly recognized. And just looking at it calms my nerves, and it really does kind of speak to the power of trees just in this image. Bob did a great job spouting all of my accolades. What I also want to do is make sure that I tell you what I'm not. We're going to talk about planting trees and why it matters for climate. And I am a forester and an arborist and an executive director. I am not an engineer or a climate scientist. So I will give you my perspective, though slightly jaded towards the vegetation solutions. But I'll try and give you a holistic perspective about what that is. And then happy to open that up to discussions about, especially with those of you that may have some other kinds of perspectives as well. All right. Let's see. So now to a little bit less pretty picture. This is not new to any of you. Climate change is happening. That's why you're here. That's why we're talking about these complicated issues and complicated solutions. And I want to just start off with what we know. We know the overall temperature in the earth is warming. We know that that warming is creating unprecedented weather events, floods, winds, droughts, all of those things, though unprecedented, are now the norm, and we're expecting the unexpected. We're seeing our cities getting hotter. We're seeing our local and our global biodiversity, plants and animals, decreasing. How do we know this? Because we get these kinds of charts and headlines hitting us constantly. We know these things are happening. We're seeing them in the media. We're seeing them in conversation, but we get distracted, right? It seems like when you see things like ghastly future and how bad is it, for that moment that hits you, it feels huge. And then you get distracted with, you know, pets in their holiday costumes and forget all about it. And so it's easy for us to just kind of be complacent in these things and accept that this is happening. So I am so grateful for organizations like yours that are really taking the time to absorb and revisit what these headlines are actually telling us and find the Am I unmuted now? All right. Okay, So also just a note on what we know, the places that feel the biggest impacts, negative impacts of climate change are not the places that are emitting. And I imagine your group has probably explored some of these imbalances. This map on my left, the purple map showing the emitters. And this, if you don't know already, climatemap.org is a great tool. You can go to that and you can choose your variables, and it creates these bubble maps that show where the impact is. So if you haven't seen that before, check it out. It's really cool. And then the map on the right is showing what countries are going to really see the biggest impacts of climate change. So that imbalance to me says we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do in the United States to make sure that we're not causing irreversible harm to others. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. Okay, so this is where we come in, right? It feels so big, climate change is happening, what can we do? And where I sit, people are like, oh, okay, great, let's just plant some trees, right? Okay, problem solved, that feels good. According to the World Economic Forum, when implemented correctly, trees are currently the most cost-effective and best technology for carbon removal and storage. That seems good, but the reality of that is that planting trees is not a replacement for emission reduction. We can't just plant trees, plant our way out of the problem that we're in right now. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the nuances of what that means and how trees can be part of a solution, but it's not the only solution. It's not a us versus an alternative. It's a collaborative approach. All right, so I did want to just put this slide in here too, because when we start talking about what the implications are of climate change, the ending results of those severe storms and the hotter climate is creating a situation where the trees themselves that are part of a solution for getting us out of the climate change problem are very vulnerable. I think that what I read was maybe 20 million trees were, let's see, did I write that down? I think I wrote it down. 10 billion trees. Sorry, I'm glad I looked. 10 billion trees were burned just last year in Australia during the bushfires. This is me, that short one there in the picture is me in Utah fighting fire. And it is amazing how much carbon comes out of those fires. And then we're burning up those oxygen making, carbon dioxide sucking machines. So the fires and the severe weather is causing a lot of problems and keeping in addition to our own development, causing forests to be deforested. A little bit closer to home, the picture on the right is an ice storm in Springfield, Missouri. We're seeing tons of damage through our urban forest and landscape due to ice storms. 25,000 trees in backyards were just ripped out of the ground in Cedar Rapids this past year in the derecho storms. So as much as we continue to try and plant trees, we're losing them at exceptional rates. I want to show you kind of the basics of why or how trees work. And this is stuff that you'll use, you typically will learn in 4th or 5th grade, but we won't get into all of the systems and sciences of it. But as most folks understand, trees absorb the carbon dioxide that's in the air. They run it through their processes in photosynthesis, and then oxygen is released. And so that storing of the carbon, as it brings that carbon in, transfers it into energy that the tree is able to use, the carbon is stored in the tree itself, in the wood tissue of the trees, in the roots, in the branches, and the leaves. And so as the tree matures, that wood tissue grows and grows and grows, the trunk gets bigger, and the carbon is held in those trees. if we cut the tree down and we chip it up and we burn it, now all that carbon is released back into the air. So that's the system. As long as we have these mature trees that are growing and sequestering carbon, using it for their wood structure, we have successfully secured that carbon out of the air. But there's a lot of difficulty in maintaining that resource, maintaining the carbon in the wood, and it can slowly get incorporated back into the landscape. A couple of other ways that trees, for example, cool our cities is a process called transpiration. So when the rains come down, the roots absorb the water, goes up through the tree, and it transpires where the water is evaporating out of the stomatas and the leaves at the top. That transpiration process also provides some cooling aspects for our urban heat islands, for example. So we're not going to talk too much about that in this, but I just want to point that out, that in the city, transpiration is also something that helps kind of cool, in addition to the shade, that can help some of our, help us feel more comfortable anyway during this changing climate. And then lastly, just a side note, because I find that folks don't always understand, tree roots actually also respire. So just like people, they're taking in oxygen and they're putting out carbon dioxide in their processes to breathe under the soil. So roots also need oxygen to function in the tree system. So it's a small portion of all of the complex systems, but I just want to point that out, that trees also need oxygen in the soil and in their roots. Another great website, if you haven't checked it out, Climate Central. I think I showed a graph of it there at the beginning also, but it's a really fun place where you can type in your local demographic information. So I could pull up exactly the calculations for St. Louis and what the trees, based on some canopy cover data nationally, they run a lot of calculations and they can kind of come up with these, carbon equivalent removed 3.6 million tons. That's for the city of St. Louis. It would be interesting to run a couple of different models for different places and show and sort of see what those different trees are doing in different parts of the city, the world. A couple of other things, just benefits: stormwater runoff. The roots of trees are going to be absorbing a lot of that rainfall, keeping our runoff from getting as polluted. And then also all of the particulate matter gets stuck on the tree roots. So that's another talk. Lots of important things that trees do for us. But ultimately, they are standing and providing these services and taking in what is in the atmosphere and using it for good. And these kinds of spaces, this is a little vacant lot in downtown St. Louis. But unfortunately, this is what that space looks like now, standing in the same location. Unfortunately, we're losing a lot of these green spaces. We're losing a lot of places where trees can thrive, not only in our extended forest, but also in our communities. This is a map of kind of global forest change. It's estimated that we had 6 trillion trees at one time across the globe. Now we're about half. We'll never be able to recover all of those trees. There are lots of UN initiatives, lots of global efforts to try and bring trees back to our planet. Currently, there's an initiative called the 1 Trillion Tree Campaign. You can find that at 1t.org. And there's lots of great resources there about how to efficiently and effectively help grow tree canopy. And 1 trillion trees is a lot, and that's not even going to get us close to where we started. But of course, we need spaces for all of the things that we put in places: cities, towns, roads, agriculture. So our job really is to find a balance in how we can take better care. making sure I'm keeping my eyes on this. Really where the space that I operate the most, obviously in Missouri, and often in the rural communities. You can see this is a current map of tree canopy in Missouri. We have a very robust forest system, thankfully, in the Ozarks. But those red areas around Kansas City, St. Louis, Springfield, Joplin, these areas are growing. And as those orange and red splotches grow, it's encapsulating a lot of the forest around it. When I was doing consulting work, a lot of my job was to do assessments of forests before a new subdivision, many of which, you know, we live in now, and looking at what forest is there, how is the new layout of the road and the, you know, the house imprints and footprints, what are we going to lose? And I will tell you, one of the most heart-wrenching moments in my career, and I'm a pretty, I wouldn't even necessarily call myself a tree hugger. I am very pragmatic in my approach to urban forestry and want to make sure I see all sides of the issue. But when I was out, and I won't say what project it was because you all know it, but it was a big project. And I was sitting out and, you know, doing my stand analysis. This is where the oaks are. This is what's happening in the understory. And I felt like I was Cinderella, not Cinderella, who's the one that goes out in the forest? Sleeping Beauty. There were birds chirping, deer running through. I saw a turkey. I was like, I just had to sit down for a minute and reflect on the fact that this landscape was going to be gone and there was nothing that I could do about it. And it was heart-wrenching. So I think that that's something that at this stage, and that was probably 15 years ago, and we're seeing more and more and more opportunities maybe to create ordinances and preservation projects that could help protect some of those areas, or at least influence more conservation in our development practices. But we're going to have to figure out how to find a balance. The map on the right is urban tree canopy. As you can see, as urbanization is more intense, we have less and less tree canopy. And the projections for our urban development will likely encapsulate a lot more of those darker green areas, you know, just as we're looking at trying to boost our climate action in the coming decades. We're going to have a big fight to protect some of those existing forests where we live, work, and play. Okay, so easy. Let's plant trees, right? Trees are a natural solution, and that's really the space that Forest ReLeaf works in. Our mission is to plant trees and enrich communities. So when people say, okay, great, let's plant trees, what we as an organization want to do is remove those barriers so that people that want to do that and want to take an action have access to trees, have access to resources, have access to technology, and can feel confident about getting a plant, putting it in the ground, and nurturing it and helping it grow. We're a 27-year-old organization, and we've been responding to these issues that I was just talking about: deforestation, invasive species, all kinds of things that are coming up in our communities, even up till environmental justice and equity. And we're looking at those through a lens of how can we best serve our community so that we can have a healthy tree canopy to support healthy people and a healthy landscape. So just a quick overview on what we do. Obviously, you can learn more about our organization at our website. It's there in the corner, moreleaf.org, or moreleaf.org, MoReLeaf. And we right now have a free tree giveaway program open. So if community organizations or your Boy Scout group or your church group or your community wants to apply for free trees to be planted on a public right-of-way, you can organize volunteers and put together a program and apply through our website, and we will give you those trees for free. We grow all native trees and shrubs at our nursery in Creve Coeur Park. So take a look at that. We also really focus on training people so that we can kind of preach to the choir, and then the choir can continue that messaging through your network. So I love this kind of a platform for us to present, because you all are the leaders in this movement in your communities, in your network. So if you understand what's going on and what's possible, then you can tap into our resources and hopefully share that with others. We also partner a lot with other park organizations. You know, you'll see forest relief trees in Tower Grove Park and Forest Park, in your neighborhood parks, in the city parks, along the streets, along the greenways. So we really want to support all of our other community organizations through our lane of trees. I'm going to move my thing over because I don't see all the things. And then really just talking about trees. You know, I think one of the things, as I've been in this position only about a year, a little over a year, it's interesting for me to understand that not everyone really realizes the value of trees. Not everyone really appreciates what planting a tree can do. And that, again, is another hour-long talk about all of the benefits of trees. But that's something that, you know, we see our organization as advocates for encouraging more action. And I'm glad that you all are receptive to that. Okay, so that's my my little elevator speech. And I want to get back to planting trees for climate change. And when we talk about the World Forum comment and their statement, the main thing that comes out and is important to understand is when done right. When done right, planting a tree means planting a tree in the right place for the right reasons. So we want our tree, we don't want to just willy-nilly go out and start sticking trees in the ground. That's not the solution that we're looking for. It's not sustainable. It can sometimes backfire. You know, if we're planting trees in an area where trees don't belong, that's not going to be effective. If we're planting trees in an area that's going to be a parking lot, that's not effective either. So thinking about what kinds of trees we want to plant and where we want to plant them, and being very strategic about that, is a really important part about my job in general. Because if we can be proactive about putting that tree in the ground, we can think about it in terms of the next 100 years. We want to be thinking long term. That's one of the qualities of most foresters that I know. While the world is very immediate and instant gratification, you can't be a tree person and wanna, 40-inch diameter oak tree tomorrow. It doesn't happen. We are planting those seedlings with the vision and the hope of what they will become, and that in itself is fulfilling. And so we have to kind of change that narrative, and making sure that people understand that what they're doing is something that is going to take a long time. It is going to be there for a while. So making that investment, it's like starting your 401k when you're born. You want it to grow, and the longer it takes, the more quality sometimes those final impacts are. So a couple of things that I want to point out to you: native trees are always a wonderful option for not only their ability to adapt to our climate region, but also because of the habitat that they create for the birds and the bees and the butterflies and the native pollinators and everything else. When we plant what was here, it's an obvious good choice for the landscape. That being said, sometimes when we're planting in, say, a highway right-of-way or a parking lot or someplace that has a very severe impact in a city, maybe we need something that's more pollutant tolerant. Maybe we need a bomb-proof tree that we know is going to do the things that we need it to for particulate matter control, and we might make a different choice. So thinking about where you're planting the tree and what you want that tree to do is going to be important. And sometimes you might have to weigh different benefits in order to choose the right thing. We also are really struggling with forest relief about climate resilience. And as we accept that our climate zones and our planting zones are shifting, that maybe we need to plant some near natives, plant some of our southern species that will, in the next 20 to 50 years be part of our climate zone? And how do we expect a tree that maybe at its upper reaches of adaptability in our region be expected to withstand the heat that we're expecting over the summer? So maybe we want to start planting or experimenting with some of our southern species in order to just be realistic about what our landscape might look like in the next 50 to 100 years. We talked about habitat. Again, if we're planting trees in and we're expanding on our native forests, Forest Relief is doing a great planting in the spring along the Katy Trail. And one of our biggest, one of our priorities was to work with the resource managers at the state park and make sure that what we were planting there reflected what the native species is. So when we're expanding our natural forests, we don't want to go in there and plant a bunch of Japanese maples. We want to plant and expand the forest that exists. And that's really where the biggest impact in climate change is going to be, is in those broader forest systems. So if we can plant what was here and we can expand that forest, that kind of collective forest, it's going to be a great, that's going to make a big impact. And then site specific, I think we went over that, but ultimately look at where you have to plant a tree, consider what it is that you need. And I would say, especially those of you who are in urban landscapes, it's okay to have priorities of beauty. It's okay to have priorities of low maintenance. These are things that sometimes we neglect to prioritize in our effort to be environmentally friendly, but ultimately we need to live together with nature. And I want all of you to love the tree that you plant in your backyard. And so there's enough options and enough opportunities to find something that fills your cup, that makes you smile when you walk out to your car, that's also going to be helping with our climate and also going to be helping with our pollinators and all the other things. And it doesn't have to check all of the boxes. Okay, so some species capture more carbon than others. So as we narrow back down into what can we do for climate change in particular, big is better. And that's a hard thing for us to swallow sometimes, because big is harder. Big takes longer. Big is more expensive. So we often gravitate towards small, kind of pretty landscape trees, not really realizing that over the course of its lifetime, if we want to plant that tree for carbon sequestration, the carbon is building up, like we talked about, in the trunk. It's bringing all of that in, the leaves are collecting all of that and bringing it into the trunk tissue. So if you have a tree that's never going to get bigger than, the size of your, deck pole, it's not necessarily going to have the long-term impact or as good of an impact in climate and carbon as this is the McBain bur oak on the Katy Trail just outside of Columbia, Missouri. It's our national champion bur oak tree. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, you can bike ride to it, and it is lovely. It just got struck by lightning last year though, so I haven't been out to see it since then. On the right-hand side here, you can see this is a list. I will plug now iTree. So itreetools.org is a tree benefits calculating tool, and it's really super fun. I think there might be I've done some presentations about this, and I'm not sure if we have any up, but you might be able to find them. But ultimately, it's a way for anyone to calculate the benefits of the trees that they have in their landscape or project tree benefits on a project that you are planning to plant. So we had run some numbers for a project that we were working on for 900 trees. And it was very interesting to me to see the different species breakdown of which trees were going to give you the biggest payout. And it just has to do with the tree biology itself. So this is an example. These have very site-specific calculations involved with them. So I wouldn't say this is a carpeted, you can take this to the bank and say, okay, well, a northern red oak is only going to be half as much as a river birch, because that's not necessarily true across the board. But I wanted to point it out to you mainly to show that something like a gray dogwood isn't really you're not sequestering almost any carbon because it's a very small native shrub. You know, hazelnuts example too, even hornbeams. So some of our smaller trees tend to not be as powerful. Plant an oak tree. It's a win. A walnut though, it has its other challenges. Oops. Okay. All right. Planting trees is not enough. I want everyone to realize that I love trees, and I want to tell everyone, yeah, plant the trees. I want to tell the corporations and the people who want to offset for their plane rides and all of the things that they can feel good and they can plant trees and that'll save the planet, but it won't. So I'm going to be clear about that. It is a super great start and it's something that you should do, but it's not enough. We also have to care for them. This is a huge challenge that we face in urban forestry, especially in the nonprofit tree planting realm. Okay, hold on. I gotta make sure. I got a few more minutes. We got to plan for them. We've got to water them. The biggest payout of tree sequestering carbon is when they're teenagers. When they're babies, they're growing, they're taking resources. We got to water them. They're developing wood tissue and canopy. Once they hit that teenager time, that's when they're really giving back all of the benefits and they're storing as much carbon as they can. So we got to get them to that point. We have to let them live that long. There's an effort that was blew up YouTube, Team Trees. You can look it up, but they planted 20 million trees in 2020. I think they're up to 21 million trees now. And there's a lot of great wraparound YouTube videos. There's a great one called It's Okay to Be Smart that explains kind of what is happening for your kids, especially. I have a link at the end. But they planted 20 billion trees. But then if you look at this, the world is emitting more than 30 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year. That's a lot. Even when we think of 21 million trees, we think, whoa, that's great. And then you think about how, what that really impacts, it's not that much. And then if you trickle that down into you planting 2 trees in your backyard, it's sort of defeating, but it's not. There's more. And I'll tell you really quickly at the end. This is just an interesting map. Again, something to play around with, the Reforestation Hub. You can put in here all the different places where you want to see where trees are available to plant. And the beauty is Missouri is ripe for reforestation. We have a lot of places where we could plant trees. And so the opportunity is there, but the challenge is hard. Everything that I was looking at preparing for this, just to kind of calibrate myself, was saying things like trees are not a silver bullet. I put it in here mostly because I want you to never say it. Trees and bullets aren't anything alike. Trees are green. Trees are life-giving. We should not be comparing trees and bullets ever. But I also think it's important and it's timely in that it shows, or it talks about the fact that we can't just plant a tree for a privilege to be careless about destructive things that we want to do. We can't offset our oil and gas or our electricity or whatever else we want to do by planting trees and then say, feel like our conscience is clear. The other main point is that we have to keep the trees that we have. The biggest impact of climate and forests is protecting intact existing forests. We have a lot of them in Missouri. It's worth our time to invest in what those things are, where they are, and how we can do our part to protect them. Bonus value of trees. I'm going to run through this super quick because it's important to know that just planting trees is win, 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 win. Win, 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 win. When you plant a tree, you're getting the climate benefit, albeit smallish compared to, but everybody can do our part. I think of it as kind of like recycling your cans. Just you doing it isn't going to make a difference, but it's creating this culture that's really important. But all of the other benefits associated with trees, we're learning more and more and more, and you can see, you can do your own research or, look at more information, but we know the human health components associated with trees. We know that trees planted by our houses reduce our energy costs. We know they increase home values, cleaning our air and water. So trees are great. And I wanted to throw this one in here because one of my heroes, Wangari Maathai, won the Nobel Prize in 2004 for her efforts in reforestation. And what she found in Kenya was that the reforestation effort really led to women's empowerment. So we see this in so many different ways, that trees bring life not only to the landscape, but to the people that are involved in doing that work. And that in itself, I think, is really, really, really valuable. There is a lot of conversation around city trees versus forest trees. Which one's better? Which one's working when it comes to climate change? And the overall assumption is that the biggest bang for your buck is forested landscapes when you're talking about climate change. And then people will talk about the health benefits and the other benefits associated with trees. But what I think has been missing from the conversations, at least in the places that I've been looking, is the influence of these trees. And the kids that are planting trees with me in Fairgrounds Park last summer are going to be the kids that love trees and want to jump in leaves. And they're going to grow up to be me hanging upside down in a tree as a grown-up who's going to want to save the forest that's here. And if we aren't inspiring the kids that are living in the cities to love and nurture nature, they're not going to vote for the conservation department. They're not going to care about our forests and our national forests and our state parks. Like, they're not. And so city trees are such an important part of connecting people with nature, so that they even want to ask the question about whether or not it's important. And when they realize it is important, you know, the next generation is going to be teed up to really make some big inroads in conservation, I think. Okay, there we go. I think I'm down to the end, and this is the action items. And these are the things that are on the blog post that I think Brian mentioned. But the main things that I would suggest that you take action on is plant a tree, plant a native tree. We have a lot of options in Missouri for a native tree in your yard or in your land if you manage land. Protect the taxes for the Missouri Department of Conservation. You may not realize, but the Missouri Department of Conservation is a gift to Missouri, and other states are so jealous of that opportunity. So definitely consider supporting them when those opportunities arise. Volunteer, donate to Forest ReLeaf. We're a nonprofit organization and we're volunteer run. So we would love to see you out at our nursery or at our planting projects, and we'll take your money. So if you don't have the time to volunteer and you have some financial resources, please donate to us and we will make sure that that goes to trees planted across Missouri. We really focus on making sure that anyone, anywhere, no matter what their zip code, has access and the privilege of planting trees. Join your local citizen advisory groups. This is something that's interesting that a lot of people don't realize. Cities, especially Tree City USA, you can find that information on the Arbor Day Foundation website if your community is a Tree City USA. But if your community is a Tree City USA, they have a tree board or some advisory capacity within their organization. Then they're looking for input from residents. So check it out and see if that's something that you might be a part of or you might be able to influence. And then lastly, maintain and protect mature trees in the landscape, whether that's watering your trees, hiring a reputable arborist to take care of the trees so that they can sustain and continue doing what they're doing is really important. And then understanding the tree ordinances in your community. There are a lot of tree protection ordinances or sort of semblances of tree protection ordinances. And those are the mechanisms in which urban forests are protected, or our kind of suburban developed forests could potentially be affected. So that's something that requires a lot of public input and outcry in order to influence and change. So take a look at that and see if that's something that you have an opportunity to inform. And I think with that, I am done. I have my information here. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer questions offline or connect you with resources if you have other needs or kind of questions. A couple of the great watches, this Trees versus Climate and the 20 million trees link. I don't know. I'll send these to Rachel too and make sure that she has the link, because I don't think you guys can click on them. But they're great resources for young people that really break down how trees are impacting climate change. All right, and if we have time, I'm still happy to take a few questions.
Thank you, Meredith. That was great. Really loved your talk, and I'm inspired. I'm going to go plant some trees in my yard. We're gonna show a slide of some of those actions that are connected to your talk, so people can be looking at them, because later on, after the question and answer, we're going to ask them to select some of those actions to, if they're willing to do them. So we'll have a question and answer period next. And one of the questions I wanted to start with is a question about planting non-native trees, with the idea that because they may survive better, even though they're not part of the native environment of Missouri, but they would have less damage from insects possibly, and would survive longer. And so that we could use that as a way to absorb carbon, even though they're not native trees. What do you think of something like that?
It's complex, but yes. So let's use the example of a ginkgo tree. It's an amazing and beautiful tree. It grows well in our landscape. It grows great in kind of disturbed high clay soil. It's low maintenance, a male ginkgo tree. But it doesn't have any biological benefits to our plants and animals. Nothing eats it, right? So it's not serving the purposes of a great tree for the landscape, for the ecosystem, but it's a great urban tree. So in a position like that, where you need low maintenance, you need a tree that's not going to be susceptible to insect and diseases. It's a good choice. That's the tree that they picked to plant along the arch grounds at City Garden, and it's gorgeous. But it doesn't check all the boxes. The main thing that I would say is you have to make sure that any non-native trees that you plant are not invasive trees. That's the biggest problem. So we know the science has been good enough at this point to help us understand which trees are going to escape cultivation, escape your front yard and go into the woods, and those trees that don't. And so planting a non-native landscape tree, there's nothing wrong with that. It's nice, you can have a mix of that. But making sure you're not planting one that seeds a calorie pear, for example, or a tree of heaven. Some of these trees, even a burning bush. So there's lists of invasive, noxious trees that you should avoid when planting non-natives.
So Meredith, as a follow-up to that same line of question, so let's say we have non-native invasive trees. Should those sometimes be cut down, such as a calorie pear or Bradford pear? I mean, should we take those down, or should we just try to control them? What do you think about that?
You should take them down. That's the bottom line. You cannot control an invasive plant. It will spread it. The reason why it is invasive is because it spreads its seeds. It is pollinated and spread with birds and wind, and there's no way of controlling it beyond removal. Forest ReLeaf is actually doing we're partnering with the Missouri Invasive Plant Task Force this spring for a pear buyback. So if you cut your calorie pear down and you take a picture of it, then we'll give you a free tree. And you can plant that tree in your backyard. It'll be you could plant it in your private property. But just a way to encourage people to remove their trees. And it's going to be a long haul, but it's definitely worth fighting.
So I've got a question. When a tree decomposes, does it release carbon just like when we burn one, or is it one way or another, a tree is going to ultimately give up all the sequestered carbon? Is the process of a dying, decomposing tree different than just like having it burn all at one time?
Yes, and I will put the caveat that I don't have all the equations in my professional toolbox, but what ultimately happens is eventually, yeah, the carbon is going to be released, but it's a slow process, and in that process, there's a lot of carbon that's bound up in the soil. There's carbon that's utilized by the microbes and the other organisms that are out there using it. So it's a process of kind of recycling. It's not the same as just a burned up carbon, release. It takes a lot of time, and less of that carbon is going into the atmosphere and more is being used in other systems.
So as climate change is happening, are there some native trees that might not be good to plant even right now? Are we already,
I would say no. I don't think that there's any native trees that we should say, hey, avoid planting this one or that one. I think the only thing would be to experiment with maybe broadening our palette of trees, accepting in some southern species that aren't in our kind of our database already. But no, I think the name of the game is diversity. Just like in your business portfolio or in our communities, we're stronger when we have a diverse set of influences. And so the more trees we can plant that have different kinds of genetic variability and different kinds of species strengths, the better off, we're going to be as a forested community.
And tell us about a tree that might be overcrowding another tree. Is there sort of like in a forest, it seems like trees are very dense. When we plant them in our yards, we tend to have a specimen and it's surrounded by lawn or something like that. How do you manage that kind of thinking? Can an urban environment look more like a forest, or what do you do about those issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of it is personal preference. If you go out to a forest, trees, you could have two trees growing within a foot of each, two oak trees, right? So it depends on the aesthetic in some ways that you want. It depends on the nature of what you need that tree to do. If you're planting it in the park strip in front of your house, you need to have those trees, the form of the tree be a certain way. So thinking about the end game of how you want that look to be, maybe you do want one big tree in your backyard with lawn. I will say trees and lawn don't go great together. Many of you maybe have had that experience. Hard to grow big trees and lawn. So thinking also about not only clustering trees and understory, but also putting together ground covers and different other kinds of native species underneath your trees is a really great opportunity to have a beautiful landscape and have kind of the whole tier of vegetation that is used to thriving together. But there's nothing wrong with clustering trees together. You'll see that in a lot of landscape designs. You want 3 trunks of a tree that then kind of combine into one big canopy. What'll happen if trees are clustered together? They're smart, they know, they just die back. The branches that don't get sun don't get leaves. Those branches die off, you prune those out, and they adapt just like we would expect them to.
So Jonathan asks, he says they had 5 Siberian elms on their lot when they bought their home 6 years ago. 3 of those have died and the other 2 are not looking good. Why is that?
Siberian elm is one of those very weedy trees. It's a non-native, and they often, it's hard to give a reason for some tree dying. There's so many different reasons. It could have been root damage, it could be flooded, it could be drought, it could be old age, it could be rot and decay in the canopy. There's all kinds of reasons why your trees might die. But Siberian elm as a species tends to be very weak wooded. It grows fast. And it, even if you have a tree that's been standing there for a long time, I had a beautiful Siberian elm tree, the prettiest one I've ever seen in my backyard in Salt Lake City. And it shaded my whole house and I loved it, but it was a weed. And so it would drop branches all the time anyway. Like it's just the nature of that species that they tend to kind of fall apart after a while.
Okay, John wants to know, and Brenda want to know, what is the tree that is behind you in your?
Oh, it's a ficus. I babysit. My mother has an outdoor pool with a concrete patio, and so in the winter time we babysit her ficus tree.
So when you said support the Department of Conservation, what are some ways we can support them? We want them to have a budget, or what?
They have, so yes, exactly. So the Conservation Department is funded by a sales tax, and it is a very unique sales tax in this country. And it is the reason why we have all of these amazing educational opportunities through the Conservation Department. It's the reason why we have a lot of conservation areas. They're not state parks, they're not Forest Service, they're our conservation areas for hunting, for fishing, for recreating, for camping. And all of that is because we have this sales tax. And it's always, I think people value it enough, but that's the only reason why we have it, is because when it goes to a vote or when there's any kind of question, they're always looking at, is this an effective organization? Is this worth all the money that we're investing? And so it really takes people calling their legislators, people telling really putting their voice behind these kinds of organizations and these kinds of political infrastructure to say, no, this is something that we value and that we need and that we use. So I think just communicating that, it's amazing to me how much a testimony or a call to your, local council member, like people listen to those kinds of things, and there aren't that many people that do it. So the few voices that are heard, if they're good ones, have a really good outcome. And if they're bad ones, have the opposite outcome.
Okay, what about when we use trees as a building material? Like, so we make lumber, is that a good way to sequester carbon? I mean,
yes.
Is it a green building material in a way?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are so many great engineering projects happening right now on the green, like the wood building, wood skyscrapers. If you're into that, I don't know who asked, but look up wood, wood skyscrapers, because ultimately, if you can use the wood from the tree once it's cut down, then all of that carbon is kept out of the system. And then we're using that material as a renewable resource rather than all of the problem, all of the other implications of using, making steel beams, for example. So there's a lot of momentum around, especially wood buildings. And it's a great opportunity for carbon sequestration.
Great. Okay, so I think it's Bob asks about trees versus prairies. As a Missouri master naturalist, he struggles with the accepted practice of a prescribed prairie burn. The event is intended to help preserve native grasses and forbs and suppress trees and invasive plant growth, but then there's all the smoke and fire that seems counterproductive. Is there any data to help support that this actually leads to better carbon sequestration when they do the prescribed burn?
So there's a lot in that question, and yeah. I will answer to my expertise and give you a few nuggets to chew on. One, we need to be very thoughtful about where we're planting trees and make sure we're planting trees where they're supposed to be. And so if we have native prairies, we want to make sure that we maintain that ecosystem also. So, in this push to plant 1 trillion trees, for example, we don't want to plant 1 trillion trees out in the prairie where they're supposed to be, goldenrod and bluegrass and whatever. So we want to make sure that we're planting trees where they belong. But when we talk about fire in particular, that's a natural cycle. And those prairies require that kind of fire in order for them to be sustainable. So it's important that we If we're removing fire from the landscape because we have houses around that prairie or we have people and trails, we have to do that in a prescribed way. That's important because also if we don't do kind of prescribed fires, we have an opportunity to build up a lot of fuel. And then those fires are going to be much more intense, creating much more smoke into the atmosphere than if we do them on a regular basis, where they're helping the ecosystem thrive and also minimizing the opportunity for really big hot fires that cause, you know, worse impacts.
All right, so we've got one last question, and then we'll kind of wrap this portion up. But Meredith, if you'll stay on with us, we're going to talk about previous meetings, and then we may come back if you can hang around just a little bit longer.
Sure, no problem. Happy to.
Okay, so last question from Bev. Do you have any recommendations for a ground cover that's currently a suburban lawn with several mature oak trees that will prevent much from growing under them?
Okay.
So I guess
The question is, can you grow?
Can we-
ground cover under?
yes, can we grow something else besides grass under that oak tree? You know,
Yes, you can grow lots of things under there. And I'm going to take a pass on the actual species recommendations. And I'm going to point you to grownative.org. Grow Native has amazing resources for the home landscape. And if you type in there, I want a native shade garden. I have a big tree. I want a list of opportunities for ground cover, for, you know, base shrubs, whatever. They put that out there for you. And there's top 10 lists of kind of tried and true. I'm not a gardener I like, if it's woody, I'm good at it. The rest of it, I'm kind of amateur. And so I look to that and, you know, want some bomb-proof plants, and they have great lists of that. So I would recommend.
All right, thank you, Meredith. So at this point, we're going to put up that survey that we promised. So it will have some of the actions connected to your talk. We're going to give people 60 seconds to look that over and fill out the survey. It should be appearing on your screen. I'll try not to talk for this too much, but I might talk.